Something happened. Not something significant, not a crisis, not a genuine confrontation. A tone of voice, a look that carried an edge you couldn't quite read. A door closed slightly harder than usual. A comment that landed in a way its speaker probably didn't intend. And the reaction was bigger than the moment warranted. You felt it as it was happening. The heat arriving before the thought. The withdrawal, or the anger, or the flooding coming faster than any conscious decision was made. The body was already in it before the mind had assessed the situation. And somewhere in the middle of it, a secondary awareness. This is too much. The intensity of this reaction does not match what is actually happening. And then, sometime after, hours later perhaps, or in the quiet of that evening, the question arrives that most men would rather not ask. Why did I react like that? Not because you want to examine yourself, not out of some appetite for psychological introspection, but because the reaction produced consequences. Something was said, or something was not said, or the space between you and another person changed in a way that will need repairing. And the honest recognition that the intensity came from somewhere that the present moment alone cannot account for. This episode is about that somewhere. Not to excavate it dramatically, not to produce a diagnosis or a label, but to offer what most men in this situation have never been given. A framework that makes sense of the experience, that removes the shame from it, that replaces the confusion of why am I like this with the more useful question, what is this reaction telling me? And what can I do with the information? Bessel van der Kolk is a psychiatrist who spent decades working with people who had survived overwhelming experiences, war, abuse, accidents, complex developmental environments, and who carried the evidence of those experiences not primarily in their memories, but in their bodies. His work, summarized in the title of his most significant book, begins with a foundational observation. The body keeps the score. Overwhelming experiences that exceeded the nervous system's capacity to integrate at the time, are not primarily stored as narrative memories. They are stored as physiological patterns, as ways the nervous system has learned to respond to certain signals, as the specific activation patterns that the body adopted in order to survive a situation, and that the body continues to employ when it detects, accurately or inaccurately, something that resembles that situation. This means that the past is not simply memory, it is physiology. It is the body's current operating system, shaped by experiences that may have occurred decades ago. And it means that the disproportionate reaction, the anger that is too large, the withdrawal that is too fast, the flooding that has no rational basis in the present situation, is not random. It is not a character defect. It is not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with the man experiencing it. It is the nervous system responding to a present-day trigger with the intensity of the original experience the trigger resembles. The pattern was installed at a time when it was necessary. The environment it was designed for no longer exists. But the system cannot automatically update itself. It requires something more deliberate than the simple passage of time to do so. Understanding this is the beginning of being able to change it. The word disproportionate is important because it is the key to understanding what is happening. A proportionate reaction is calibrated to the present situation. The stimulus is assessed at its actual size and significance, and the response matches. Minor frustration produces mild irritation. A genuine injustice produces genuine anger. A real threat produces appropriate alertness and action. A disproportionate reaction is calibrated to something else. The stimulus arrives, and the system responds, but not to the present tense version of the stimulus, to a remembered version. A version that carries the weight and significance of a previous experience in which this kind of stimulus was genuinely threatening, genuinely overwhelming, genuinely requiring the full activation of the system's protective resources. The present-day colleague's impatient tone is a minor inconvenience. But if that tone closely resembles the tone of a parent who was genuinely dangerous, whose impatience preceded unpredictable anger, whose impatience meant something specific about what was coming, the nervous system does not distinguish between the present instance and the remembered one. It responds to the signal, not the context. This is not a failure of intelligence or rationality. The man can often see, simultaneously, that the reaction is too large. He knows, in the cognitive sense, that his colleague's tone is not the same as his parents', but the body has already responded. The knowing arrives after the activation, which is physiologically the correct order of events. The brain's threat detection systems operate faster than conscious assessment. This is why they are useful. They protect us before we have time to think. But they cannot distinguish between a past threat and a present situation that merely resembles it. They respond to pattern, not to context. The disproportionate reaction is the result of a pattern match, a signal in the present that closely resembles a signal from the past, triggering a response that was appropriate then and is not appropriate now. Van der Kolk's research established with clinical precision the mechanism by which overwhelming experiences become physiological patterns. When an experience exceeds the nervous system's capacity to integrate, when it is too intense, too prolonged, too unpredictable, or too frequent for the available coping resources to process, the system responds with its most fundamental protective mechanisms: fight, flight, freeze. These are not chosen responses. They are automatic activations. The body's emergency protocols for situations that threaten survival. The heart rate elevates. The muscles prepare for action. The higher cortical functions, the parts of the brain responsible for language, deliberate reasoning, and nuanced assessment, go offline. The body is in survival mode. In acute, temporary situations, a car that swerves toward you, a physical altercation, a genuine emergency, this system works as intended. The crisis passes, the activation resolves, the body returns to baseline. But in situations that are chronic rather than acute, ongoing environments of unpredictability, emotional unavailability, threat, or overwhelm, the system cannot fully resolve. The activation becomes the baseline. The nervous system, shaped by the consistent signal that the environment requires this level of vigilance, remains in a state of preparedness that becomes, over time, its default setting. And the specific patterns that were activated in that environment become the specific patterns the system employs when it detects something similar in any subsequent environment. This is the physiological foundation of what most people call trauma responses. And Van der Kolk was explicit about something that is important for this episode. This does not require acute single-event trauma. Complex developmental experiences, years of living in an emotionally unpredictable environment, years of having a caregiver whose mood was the primary weather system of the household, years of managing other people's emotional states as a condition of safety, produce the same patterns at a lower intensity, The man who grew up in this kind of environment did not necessarily experience a single dramatic event. He experienced a consistent pattern that shaped his nervous system's default settings. And those settings persist in the body, in the reactions that arrive before thought, into an adult life that may look entirely different from the environment that produced them.
The word trigger has become so common in contemporary language that it has lost some of its precision. Let me use it precisely. A trigger is a present-day stimulus that closely resembles a stimulus from a past overwhelming experience, closely enough that the nervous system responds to it with the activation patterns of the original experience. The specific triggers vary enormously between individuals because they are calibrated to the specific patterns of specific experiences. For one man, a raised voice in a meeting activates the fight-or-flight response that a parent's anger once activated. For another, a period of silence from a partner activates the vigilance and anxiety that a parent's emotional withdrawal once produced. For another, being in a position of public performance activates the shame response that failure in childhood once activated. The trigger is not the present-day event itself. It is the resemblance between the present-day event and the past experience. And the activation produced is not a rational assessment of the present-day risk. It is the body's recall of how serious the original pattern was. This produces the specific quality of disproportionate reactions that most men describe. The reaction is not experienced as a response to the colleague's tone, or the partner's silence, or the public performance. It is experienced as overwhelming, as large, as urgent, as requiring the full resources of the system. Because that is what it actually is, a response to the original experience, which was overwhelming, not to the present instance, which is not. And the man in the middle of it cannot simply think his way out, because the activation is physiological. It has bypassed the cognitive systems that would allow for deliberate assessment. The body is already in it. The knowing that the reaction is too large arrives too late to prevent the reaction.
I want to be specific about this, because the framework of trauma is often rejected by men who do not identify with its most dramatic presentations. The man who has not been to war, who was not abused, who did not experience a single identifiable catastrophic event, may hear the word trauma and dismiss the framework as not applicable to him. van der Kolk's contribution to this is significant and deserves direct statement. Trauma, in the broadest and most clinically supported sense, is not defined by the drama of the precipitating event. It is defined by the impact on the nervous system. Any experience that exceeds the nervous system's capacity to integrate at the time and leaves, as a result, a lasting pattern of activation qualifies. This includes the experience of growing up with a parent whose emotional state was volatile, unpredictable, or frightening. The experience of being consistently shamed or dismissed. The experience of emotional isolation, of having emotional needs consistently go unmet. The experience of a home environment that was not safe, in the emotional, if not the physical sense. None of these may look, from the outside, like trauma. The man may have had adequate food, adequate shelter, adequate care in the material sense. He may not have experienced anything he would describe as abuse. But if the pattern of his experience shaped his nervous system toward heightened vigilance, toward the anticipation of disapproval, toward the automatic management of other people's emotional states as a condition of safety, then the nervous system carries patterns that are, in clinical terms, the result of developmental overwhelm. And those patterns produce disproportionate reactions in adult life, not because the man is weak or damaged, because because the nervous system learned what it needed to learn to survive the environment it was in. The learning was appropriate. The environment it was calibrated for is gone. The learning remains.
Marcus Aurelius wrote, in one of the meditation's most compressed passages, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This is frequently quoted as an injunction to action over theory, and it is that. But in the context of the Stoic tradition from which it comes, it is also something else.
The Stoics understood that the foundation of every virtue, every genuine capacity for wise action, for equanimity, for the character qualities that Marcus was describing, was self-knowledge. Not abstract philosophy, not the knowledge of what a good man should be, the specific, honest knowledge of what one actually is. Epictetus taught that the beginning of philosophy was the examination of the self, not the external world, the self, the patterns it runs, the responses it generates, the assumptions it makes. This examination was not indulgent. It was the prerequisite for genuine self-governance.
A man who does not understand his own reactions is governed by them. He experiences them as things that happen to him, responses that arrive without warning, emotions that surge without apparent cause, behaviors that occur before he has consciously chosen them. The man who understands his reactions, who has developed enough self-knowledge to recognize the pattern in the moment it is running, has something the first man does not. He has, at least in principle, a choice. Not immediately, not completely. The nervous system's patterns are not simply overridden by recognition, but recognition is the first condition for change. The man who can notice, in the middle of a disproportionate reaction, that this is a pattern, that this intensity is not calibrated to the present, but to something earlier, has created a small but genuine moment of space. And in that space, something other than the automatic response becomes available. The practice this episode is pointing toward is not a technique. It is a shift in the relationship to one's own reactions. From shame to curiosity. The shame response, the immediate judgment of a disproportionate reaction as evidence of weakness, damage, or deficient self-control, closes off the very inquiry that would be useful. Shame says, this should not have happened, and I should not have these reactions. And shame in this application produces suppression, the attempt to prevent the reactions from occurring or to minimize them once they have. Suppression does not work, as EP007 established. The reaction suppressed is not the pattern integrated. Curiosity says something different. Curiosity says, this reaction is larger than the present situation warrants. Something is happening here beyond the immediate event. What is it? This is not a therapeutic process necessarily. It does not require a therapist or a formal intervention, though for patterns that are significantly disruptive, professional support is worth considering. It requires, in the first instance, a different relationship to the experience of being triggered. The next time a reaction arrives that is larger than the situation warrants, pause when the intensity allows. Not in the middle of the activation, necessarily. Afterward, in a quieter moment. And ask, what did this remind me of? When have I felt this intensity before? The answer is usually available if asked honestly. The body often knows. There is a specific quality of familiarity in the intense reaction, a sense of having been here before, in a way that transcends the present circumstance. Follow that thread, not to excavate a narrative or assign blame, to understand the pattern, to see the map the nervous system is using, and recognize that it was drawn from a different territory than the one you are currently in. That recognition is not a cure, but it is the beginning of integration. The process by which the pattern, seen clearly and met with honest attention, gradually updates to match the present rather than the past. Come back to the moment the episode opened with. The reaction that was too large, the activation that arrived before the assessment. The specific quality of being at the mercy of something inside yourself that you did not choose and cannot easily control. That experience is not a character flaw. It is a nervous system doing exactly what it was shaped to do, protecting you, using patterns that were formed when protection was genuinely required, responding to signals that resemble the signals from a time when the response was necessary. The patterns were appropriate. The environment they were calibrated for is different from the one you are in now. And the work of integration, the work of gradually updating the map, is the work of honest self-knowledge. Van der Kolk spent his career establishing the mechanism. He was not the first. The Stoics, 2,000 years before the neuroscience existed, arrived at the same foundational insight from a different direction. The man who knows himself, who has examined his reactions with the specific honesty that requires neither dramatic self-criticism nor defensive avoidance, is already in a different relationship to those reactions than the man who simply experiences them. He is not at their mercy in the same way. He may still have them. The nervous system does not change overnight, but he is not merely their subject. He is beginning to be their student, and the student of his own reactions, over time, becomes their master, in the genuine Stoic sense. Not the man who has eliminated the reactions, but the man who understands them well enough to meet them, to name them, and to choose, increasingly, how he responds. That is the work. And it begins with the question, what is this reaction actually telling me?
Here's the one thing worth carrying. Disproportionate reactions are not character failures. They are the nervous system doing its job with outdated information. Shame closes the inquiry. Curiosity opens it. The next time a reaction surprises you, ask what it is telling you, not what is wrong with you. What does this remind me of? When have I felt this before? Follow that thread. Self-knowledge of this kind is not weakness. It is the prerequisite for genuine strength. I'll see you in the next one.